back to Bob Lazar and Gene Huff. Bob, here's a really good question for you. I guess we ought to finish up. So, you got arrested after being on television with George Knapp.
Well, not really arrested. They said just come down and talk to us. But, essentially that was the impetus of everything, was talking on the
TV.
Art, there's a big, long, drawn-out story behind it, which we probably don't have time to go into.
All right.
Essentially, the madam of the brothel was an informant for the FBI, DEA,
yep.
And anyway, she got off. She was a prostitute who ran the whole brothel, and she got off with a misdemeanor from an old early 1900s Nevada statute called keeping a disorderly house. And they had to nail somebody, and Bob just went down and turned himself in, and they gave him probation, and that was it. So.
I see. Well, a lot of people...
But even the judge thought it was very strange that the FBI was at the trial. And I think he made some very unusual comments, too, knowing that there was some other influence.
Yeah. The judge said on camera in court that he didn't understand why the madam of this brothel got off with a misdemeanor, and considering that Bob Lazar was certainly not a panderer in the classic sense of the term and had no prior criminal record, why in the world he would have pled guilty to pandering. Yeah, it was some bad legal advice. And
well, we can all turn our imaginations loose on that one.
Yeah.
It's not real
And
hard.
actually, they gave him probation, and the people of the probation department used to fight to try and get to come do the checks on Bob so they could speak to Bob Lazar, the UFO guy.
All right, I want to run you through a few fast questions. I've got a million faxes. One is a good one. How could some of the UFOs or parts be disassembled if they, in essence, had no seams?
They were absolutely torn out of the craft. When I had corrected myself and said that one of the gravity amplifiers was removed from the sport model itself, it wasn't removed surgically like you would imagine. It looked like it was almost cut off with an oxyacetylene torch, though there were no burn marks on the deck. But it was absolutely ripped out. Now, I never did see where the other amplifier to that craft went, or heard any stories about it, but
maybe it was the one on the workbench.
All right, ripped out is the answer. All right, good answer. By the way, for your reference, Bob, the frog was levitated in the High Field Magnetic Laboratory in Amsterdam at 16 Tesla. If Bob would like to take a look at the photographs and read about it, I've got a web address here. The most complete account is given in, quote, of Flying Frogs and Levitrons by M.V. Berry and A.K. Geim, European Journal of Physics, version 18, page 307 to 313. That's just for your reference.
I'm really interested in that.
Have you ever, Bob, subjected yourself to regressive hypnosis in hopes of recalling details? Because obviously, even in this program, they're still coming back.
Yeah, I did. In fact, that was one of the first things we did, and it was not, again, so many offbeat stories get started on this information.
Sure.
People said I, was either drugged or hypnotized there at work and couldn't remember anything, or, however the stories go. But there are plenty of them, and they're more than a fair share on the internet. But I initially went to a hypnotist here in town by the name of Lane Keck, specifically one that had heard nothing about flying saucers, alien abductions, or any of the other silly things associated with this. And went specifically to remember intimate details of what I was working with, specifically layouts, schematics, so on and so forth, so I could sit there and, to the absolute best of my ability, draw and record everything that I had seen and done. And that did help out quite a bit. It seemed to,
All right.
And for the record, Art, Bob had a very good memory of all the major things that happened. He's talking about frequencies and quantum behavior and things that he wanted to get into relaxation and try and reread those reports. And but it was nothing like he didn't know he had worked on flying discs and suddenly remembered it under hypnosis. That's not what happened at all.
All right. Well, these are random questions, Bob. Somebody asked if the anti-gravity field has to extend all the way to the ground in order for a saucer to fly, or if it has to simply surround the disk itself or the bottom of the disk.
No, it really just has to surround the disk itself. In fact, that's how when I was talking to that other gentleman in Australia,
yes.
That is essentially what we were talking about, that the field produced around the craft is like a torrid, a big donut, essentially. However, with the bottom extended is, the pedestal, the effect of the emitters pointing in that direction. But the field does completely surround the craft.
All right. Here's another one. Please ask Bob if the principles that you've been describing tonight have any relevance in what you've heard of stories with regard to the infamous Philadelphia experiment.
The Philadelphia experiment. A long time ago, when I was at I had heard of the Philadelphia experiment some time ago, and when I was in Los Alamos, they have a classified library there in the library. And I was able to find some general information on the Philadelphia experiment. And in my personal opinion here, that this is a story that has gotten so completely blown out of proportion.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly there were people injured and people killed in the this test. The aim of the project apparently, now maybe I was reading false material, but from what I understand, the aim of the project was to make this was the apparent first test of any stealth technology. It was to make an entire ship invisible to radar, not optically invisible.
Right, correct.
And to do this, they were essentially using huge microwave generators, which is essentially what radar is. And,
you bet.
I think the accident that occurred was more along the lines of radiation injuries and things along those lines, not the more sensationalized, we flipped into another dimension.
Continuum,
and
people coming up in the middle of the metal and all.
Yeah, I think there was a much more prosaic explanation for what happened, and in my opinion, and from the small amount of information that I was able to get my hands on, because that had always fascinated me too, as to what happened with that. But I think that's all we're looking at is just an accident along those lines, and the reason for the cover-up, I think, is the same reason for the cover-ups we see around Area 51.
Sure.
Is more of a legal reason because of the injuries involved, just like the toxic waste problem.
You bet.
Out there, than there being something unbelievably top secret.
All right.
Al Bielek won't like that answer.
I know, but that's all right. Art, I'm a computer tech. My training includes understanding electronics, of course. Please ask Bob if he would give us some figures on the toroid that he worked with, perhaps voltages and current. I like to tinker.